The Rose of Greenwood. Chapter 5. The Eve of the Storm. That evening, too, Rose opened her diary. May 31, 1921. Tonight feels like the last page of one story and the first page of another. Rose Washington woke on this Wednesday morning to a world that looked exactly the same as it had the day before, but felt entirely different. The elm tree outside her bedroom window still rustled with the same gentle breeze. The morning light still painted Greenwood Avenue in warm shades of gold and amber. But underneath the familiar beauty lay a tension so thick it seemed to press against her skin like humidity before a summer storm. She had slept poorly, waking several times to listen for sounds that might signal immediate danger. Each time, she heard only the normal night sounds of a neighborhood at rest. But even those seemed somehow altered, as if the very air were holding its breath. Downstairs, she found her parents already awake and dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with their coffee and the weight of unspoken fears. Tommy's chair remained empty. He was still staying with the Johnson family until the current crisis passed. The absence of his cheerful morning chatter made the house feel hollow, incomplete. "Any news?" Rose asked, settling into her usual place and accepting the cup of coffee her mother poured for her. "Dick Rowland is still in custody," Dr. Washington said, his voice carefully neutral. "The sheriff has assured community leaders that he will be protected, that justice will be served through proper legal channels." "And do we believe him?" Clara and Dr. Washington exchanged one of their wordless conversations, the kind that married couples develop over years of shared challenges. "We want to believe him," Clara said finally. "But belief and reality don't always align." Rose sipped her coffee, finding it bitter despite the sugar her mother had added. Everything seemed to taste different today, as if even her senses were preparing for change. "What's the plan for today?" "The plan," Dr. Washington said, "is to maintain as much normalcy as possible while staying prepared for any eventuality. I'll see patients in the morning. People still need medical care regardless of what's happening downtown. This afternoon, I'll attend a meeting with other community leaders to discuss our response to any developments. And me? You'll stay close to home. Help your mother with preparations. Maybe organize some of our important papers, just in case we need to leave quickly." The words, "just in case we need to leave quickly," hit Rose like a physical blow. The idea of abandoning their home, their community, everything they had built, it seemed both impossible and increasingly inevitable. "Papa, if we leave, even temporarily, what happens to everyone who can't leave? What about elderly Mrs. Cooper, or Mr. Thompson with his bad leg? What about the families who don't have relatives in other cities?" Dr. Washington's expression grew heavy with the weight of responsibility he carried as one of Greenwood's leaders. "That's exactly what we'll be discussing this afternoon, Rose. How to protect everyone, not just those with the means to go elsewhere." The morning passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Rose helped her mother with household tasks, but their usual comfortable routines felt forced, mechanical. Clara hummed while she worked, but the melodies were spirituals, songs of endurance and faith in the face of trial. Rose found herself paying attention to details she had never noticed before. The way the morning light fell across the kitchen table, the sound of her mother's footsteps on the wooden floors, the scent of the roses blooming outside the window. It was as if she were trying to memorize her life. Around noon, visitors began arriving. First Dr. Jackson, then Reverend Hughes, then a steady stream of other men from the community. But today their gathering felt different from the previous day's meeting. The careful optimism was gone, replaced by a grim determination that seemed to settle over the house like dust. Rose tried to respect their privacy, but the fragments of conversation she overheard made her stomach churn with anxiety. Reports of weapons being distributed. "National Guard has been contacted, but, if they come to Greenwood, we'll be ready, women and children to safety first." The last phrase stopped Rose cold. She had been thinking of this crisis in abstract terms, as a problem to be solved through negotiation and reason. But the men in her father's study were talking about it in terms of warfare. Positions to defend, non-combatants to evacuate, strategies for survival. As the afternoon meeting continued, Rose found herself drawn to tasks that connected her to the life she had built in Greenwood. She organized her teaching materials, arranging her students' progress reports in careful piles. She sorted through the books she had borrowed from the library, making sure each one was properly marked for return. She even prepared lesson plans for the coming week, as if maintaining these routines could somehow guarantee that normal life would resume. But with each ordinary task, she felt herself fighting tears. The simple act of writing, June 6th, letter writing practice, at the top of a lesson plan felt like an act of defiance against a world that seemed increasingly unlikely to allow such gentle pursuits to continue. Around 4 o'clock, the meeting in her father's study finally broke up. Rose watched from the front window as the men departed, noting the way they moved, not with the leisurely pace of neighbors finishing a social call, but with the purposeful stride of people who had made difficult decisions and were now prepared to act on them. When Dr. Washington closed the front door behind the last visitor, Rose was waiting for him in the hallway. "Papa, I need to know what was decided." Her father looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing how much truth she was ready to handle. "We've decided to take a more active role in ensuring Dick Rowland's safety." "What kind of active role?" "A group of armed men will go to the courthouse tonight. We'll offer our assistance to the sheriff in protecting the prisoner and maintaining order." Rose felt her blood run cold. Armed men? Men who are prepared to defend what's right, Rose. Men who understand that sometimes the law needs citizens to stand behind it. "But Papa, what if? What if the white mob sees that as a provocation? What if they interpret it as a threat?" Dr. Washington's expression was grim but resolute. "Then they'll discover that the colored citizens of Tulsa are not as helpless as they might have assumed." The evening meal that followed was perhaps the strangest of Rose's life. Clara had prepared all of their favorite foods: fried chicken, cornbread with honey, green beans seasoned with bacon, sweet potato pie for dessert. It was the kind of meal she might have made for a celebration or a family gathering. But they ate it in near silence, each of them lost in private thoughts about what the night might bring. The food was delicious, but Rose found herself eating slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be her last meal in this kitchen, at this table, in this life they had built together. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The way the evening light slanted through the lace curtains her mother had sewn, the faint scratches on the wooden table where Tommy had done his homework for years, the comfortable creak of her father's chair when he shifted position. All of it seemed precious and fragile and worthy of remembering. After dinner, Dr. Washington excused himself to prepare for the evening's mission. Rose could hear him moving around in his study, the sound of drawers opening and closing, papers rustling, the metallic click of something she didn't want to identify. When he emerged, he was dressed in his best dark suit, as if he were going to church or a professional meeting. But Rose could see the outline of something beneath his jacket, something that transformed her gentle father into someone she didn't entirely recognize. "Samuel," Clara said quietly, "you be careful. You come home to us." "I will," he promised, kissing her cheek with a tenderness that made Rose's throat tighten. "And if anything happens, anything at all, you and Rose go to the Hutchinson farm outside of town. They're expecting you." "Papa," Rose began. "No arguments, Rose. Your mother knows the plan. If there's trouble, you follow it without question." He turned to Rose, placing his hands on her shoulders and looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her feel as if he were trying to communicate something beyond words. "My Rose, I want you to remember something. No matter what happens tonight, or tomorrow, or in the days to come, you are a Washington. That means something. It means you stand for education, for dignity, for the belief that all people deserve respect and opportunity. It means you don't let fear stop you from being who you are." Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks despite her efforts to remain strong. "I know, Papa. And remember something else. Greenwood isn't just buildings and businesses. It's not just the places where we live and work. Greenwood is an idea. The idea that colored folks can build something beautiful, something lasting, something worthy of pride. Buildings can be destroyed, Rose, but ideas are harder to kill." He pulled her into a fierce hug, and she could smell the familiar scents of his cologne and medical soap, along with something else. The sharp, clean smell of gun oil that confirmed her worst fears about what he was carrying beneath his jacket. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, my Rose. More than all the words in all the books you've ever read." After he left, Rose and Clara sat together in the parlor, neither of them able to concentrate on reading or sewing or any of the activities that usually filled their evenings. Instead, they listened to the sounds of Greenwood preparing for a night unlike any other. Automobiles moved along the streets more frequently than usual, their engines carrying an urgency that had not been there the night before. Voices called out in the darkness, not the usual evening conversations of neighbors, but something more charged with purpose and apprehension. Doors opened and closed as men gathered and departed, as families made their own preparations for an uncertain night. Around 9 o'clock, Clara finally spoke. "Rose, honey, there's something I want you to have." She left the room and returned with a small wooden box that Rose had seen on her mother's dresser for years but had never been invited to open. "This belonged to my grandmother, your great-grandmother Sarah. She was born into slavery in Mississippi, but she taught herself to read using a Bible she found in the big house. When she died, she left this to me with instructions to pass it on to any daughter or granddaughter who shared her love of learning." Clara opened the box to reveal a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The title, embossed in faded gold letters, read, "Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral by Phyllis Wheatley." Rose's breath caught. She had heard of Phyllis Wheatley, the enslaved woman who had become one of America's first published poets, but she had never seen an original edition of her work. "Great-grandmother Sarah said that this book proved something important," Clara continued. "It proved that no matter what circumstances we're born into, no matter what limitations people try to place on us, the human spirit can rise above it all. Knowledge, creativity, the desire to express beautiful thoughts, these things can't be enslaved or destroyed." Rose accepted the book with reverent hands, feeling the weight of generations in its worn pages. "Mama, why are you giving this to me now?" "Because if something happens to this house, to our things, I want to make sure this survives. And because you're the one who will carry on the tradition of teaching, of spreading knowledge, of helping people discover their own capacity for greatness." They sat together in comfortable silence, Rose carefully turning the pages of the precious book while Clara worked on her mending. The ordinary domestic scene felt like an act of resistance against the chaos threatening to engulf their world. Around 10 o'clock, the sound of automobile engines grew more frequent, and Rose could see lights moving along Greenwood Avenue. Not the steady glow of street lamps, but the moving beams of car headlights carrying people toward an unknown destination. "They're leaving for the courthouse," Clara said quietly. Rose nodded, her throat too tight for speech. Somewhere in that procession of vehicles was her father, along with dozens of other men from their community, good men, peaceful men, who had been pushed beyond the limits of patience and were now prepared to risk everything for the principle that justice should be blind to color. As the sounds of departure faded, Greenwood settled into an eerie quiet. Rose found herself straining to hear something, anything, that might give her a clue about what was happening downtown. But the night offered only the normal sounds of a neighborhood at rest, as if the very ordinariness of the evening were somehow deceptive. "Mama," Rose said finally, "what do you think will happen?" Clara set down her mending and looked at her daughter with eyes that had seen enough of life to know that hope and fear were often separated by the thinnest of margins. "I think, honey, that we're going to discover what we're really made of. All of us. And I pray that when morning comes, we'll still recognize ourselves." As midnight approached, Rose retreated to her bedroom to write in her diary. The leather-bound book felt heavier than usual in her hands, as if the events she was about to record carried more weight than her usual observations about students and lessons and daily life. May 31, 1921. Tonight, Papa went to the courthouse with other men from our community, armed and prepared to defend a young man they've never met because they understand that justice delayed is justice denied. I am so proud of him, and so terrified for him, that I can barely breathe. I keep thinking about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, about what kind of country we live in, about how far we've come since the days of slavery. Tonight might be the night we discover which of those stories are true and which are just comfortable lies we've been telling ourselves. Mama gave me great-grandmother Sarah's book of poetry tonight. Poems written by an enslaved woman who refused to let her circumstances define the boundaries of her imagination. I've been reading Phyllis Wheatley's Words by Lamplight, and they seem to speak directly to this moment. In every human breast, God has implanted a principle, which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression, and pants for deliverance. That's what's happening tonight, isn't it? Good men who have been patient of oppression for so long are finally panting for deliverance. Not just for Dick Rowland, but for all of us. For the right to live with dignity, to prosper without apology, to defend what we've built. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I pray it brings justice, peace, a return to the rule of law. But if it brings something else, if it brings the test that Papa seems to think is coming, then we will face it as Washingtons, as citizens of Greenwood, as people who have never forgotten that freedom is not given but claimed. The dreams will continue, no matter what happens to the dreamers. As they always have, as they always will. Rose closed her diary and prepared for bed, but sleep seemed impossible. Outside her window, Greenwood lay quiet under a canopy of stars, looking exactly as it had on hundreds of other peaceful nights. But she could feel something different in the air, a charge, a tension, a sense that the world was balanced on the edge of irreversible change. She thought about her father and the other men, somewhere downtown in the darkness, standing between a young man and a mob that wanted to take justice into its own hands. She thought about Dick Rowland, alone in his cell, probably unaware that so many people were risking so much for his safety. She thought about Sarah Page, the elevator operator whose words had set all of this in motion, and wondered if she understood the power she wielded. Most of all, she thought about Greenwood. Not just the buildings and businesses, but the idea her father had spoken of. The idea that colored folks could build something beautiful and lasting and worthy of pride. Tomorrow would test whether that idea was strong enough to survive whatever forces were gathering against it. As she drifted toward an uneasy sleep, Rose held great-grandmother Sarah's book of poetry against her chest like a talisman. The pages contained words written by a woman who had faced impossible circumstances and had responded by creating something beautiful, something that outlasted the system that had tried to crush her spirit. If Phyllis Wheatley could write poetry while enslaved, Rose thought, then surely the spirit that had built Greenwood could survive whatever trial was coming. In her dreams, she was teaching her evening class again, but this time the students included her great-grandmother Sarah, and Phyllis Wheatley, and women she had never met but somehow recognized, generations of teachers and learners, writers and readers, dreamers and builders, all connected by the simple but revolutionary belief that knowledge was freedom, that education was resistance, that the human spirit could rise above any circumstance. She woke several times during the night, listening for sounds that might signal her father's return or news from downtown. But the hours passed in tense silence, and when dawn finally began to lighten the sky, Rose understood that the last normal night in Greenwood's history had passed without fanfare, marked only by the fears and hopes of people who loved their community too much to let it go without a fight. What none of them knew, as they slept fitfully through those final hours of peace, was that their willingness to stand up for justice would be interpreted as an act of war, and that by evening the next day, everything they had built would be ash and memory. But for now, in these last precious hours before the storm, Greenwood slept, and dreamed, and prepared to discover what it was truly made of.